Right, so this is my take on the existence of God. And I'm probably gonna look back on this when I'm older and like cringe because it's kind of stupid. But my view, right, is that for me, um, the existence of a God, right, it all balances for me on being able to prove the existence of such a God logically and like within its own definition. So without any sort of empirical evidence or any testing, it has to be just purely logically sound, and that's what it requires for me. I don't require necessarily empirical evidence of it, but empirical evidence would be amazing to have. However, there is none of that in existence, or at the best, it's questionable. And so for me, it would have to be that it has to be provable logically through a set definition of God. So, for example, you give these divine traits to a god, right, as a definition. In my opinion, this is how I perceive what most people would call a god within Christianity. Within Catholicism, everything. It has its own definition of what a god is. In my opinion, it would be one that is omniscient, and so it knows everything, omnibenevolent, so it's all good, complete good, the ultimate true good. And whether or not such a thing exists is a whole other a whole another discussion entirely. However, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, so that God can be everywhere at one time. Um, you know, he also has to be everlasting and eternal, and what that means is that God has to have existed from the start of existence and go all the way to the end. And there's no and ifs, whys, or buts about it. That's how it has to be. Additionally, he has to be atemporal, in my opinion. He has to be completely detached from time. So he shouldn't be located entirely on one point in this very long timeline that we have. He should if this is the timeline, he shouldn't be here and be able to see forwards and backwards. In my opinion, the timeline should be like a belt, so it goes round in a circle and God's right here in the middle of this circle, just completely outside of time, and he is within every single point on this circle. This circle has an infinite diameter. It's absolutely immensely infinitely huge, and so the fury of God would have to sustain these kinds of things. He'd also have to be without personality. He wouldn't be a person. He wouldn't be a singular figure. Like he has to be like more of a force, more of a presence, and not like not just a person that's incredibly powerful. That's how I feel like it should be. He should have no personal connections, no personal ties. It should be nothing personal about him. He shouldn't look like anybody. And so when I think of that and I look at what evidence there is out there, logically these things aren't provable. Um, uh, Additionally, he should have like full power, full strength, you know, completely unlimited strength, unlimited power, logically, physically, anything, and energy-wise, completely powerful. However, there are a lot of things like you've got the rock dilemma, where can God create a rock that even he can't lift? So here's where the problem with that starts. So God is all powerful, right? He has all the power possible, an infinite resource of power. So yeah, of course he can create a rock that he can't lift. He can make that. He's made it. However, if he is all powerful, why can't he pick up the rock? It's a bit strange, isn't it? It creates a contradiction, a contradiction within itself, and which is a very, very, very important proof mathematically and logically, the proof by contradiction. And we often say that if you can prove something by claiming the opposite, and then there's a contradiction upon claiming the opposite that is logically devolved, then you have proved what you're trying to prove. And so we're saying that, okay, let's say God does exist.
he creates a stone that he can't lift. However, this creates a contradiction, being that he now is not all powerful because he cannot lift this stone. So that creates a massive issue. And so we get to this point of like, okay, so we've disproved it on the grounds of being all powerful. However, there is a response, and the response says that actually you should actually say that God is all powerful in that he can do all that is logically possible. Which, yeah, you know what? Fair enough. Is a good counter argument. It's a very, very good counter argument. And whether that's sufficient for you for the definition of God, that's completely up to you. However, for me personally, I'm a bit touch and go, because I feel like all powerful truly means all powerful, and you can't add a condition onto all powerful because it's then not all. And I know that there's a lot of like, I want to say technical jargon within philosophy, and so personally I think that being everything that's logically possible, I feel like, you know, everything that exists should be within logically possible, and to say that all powerful, I feel like that isn't logically possible. So if you feel like, you know, this God should be able to do everything that's logically possible, then fair enough, that's your opinion. Personally, it doesn't line up with mine, but that's okay. So then you start to think about the fact that, you know, God is atemporal, and so how do you prove, you know, that he was there at the end and the beginning, you know, because time and space is, from what we understand it, infinite, and how can you be at the beginning and the end of something that never begins and also never ends? It's like an infinite. There's an analogy about a rope hanging off of a ledge, and I believe that it's kind of saying like, you know, if you how do you grab the end of an infinite rope or something like that, and it doesn't make any logical sense. But you know, there's I truly believe that if there was such a God, it would be logically possible on the conditions that God is atemporal. He would have to be atemporal, outside of time, and able to observe every moment in time simultaneously. And this goes on to the fact that the reason why he would need to do that is because if he was omnibenevolent, he'd have to be all good, purely good, and that's really hard to do, because, you know, how do you decide how to make everything good? Surely you would just make people do good things. You would make them not do crime. You would make diseases, illness, plague not exist, right? That's how you would do it. You would remove all suffering. However, in doing that, you take away the freedom of the agents. You take away the freedom of every living thing, every human, every animal, every plant, even every cell, you know, every atom, everything, every subatomic particle. It all loses its freedom to act. And for a lot of people, being made to do something without any control over how you want to do it, how you choose to do it, how you desire to do it, is more evil than what happens through free choice. So they think that actually you should be given free choice, even though technically there are way more evil acts. However, that tops it all, taking away people's freedom. And I agree with that. I agree that, you know, you should be able to make your own choices. You shouldn't have it all set out for you, because I think that is really unfair. Some people have it great, some people have it terrible. Why do those people have to have it terrible? So others don't. You know, there's a lot of discussion about it, and so you'd have to then make another branch off of one of these things, and you say, okay, he's omnibenevolent, but he still gives people free will. And the way he does this is that he guides people on a certain path that creates the least amount of evil. And so you say, like, how much does he guide them before it becomes lack of free will? You know, at what point Is fate overtaking? You know, are we really free if we're being pushed towards a certain timeline? You know, it really doesn't, like, it's really not satisfying my desire for this free will to exist and also this ultimate good. So, you know, it's a tough thing where there's such a contradiction where it's like, how can he be all good but provide so much evil, you know, by bringing people into existence? Because that's what a god would do. That's what they say God does, is he creates the universe, he creates life. So why would he create something that causes so much evil? It doesn't make sense. And so even if you say this is the best timeline, wouldn't the best timeline be people not existing at all? How do you measure how good a timeline is? Do you measure it by total good minus total evil? How do you define good and evil? How do you measure that? How do you take that away from each other? Of course, an all-knowing God, an all-powerful, all-knowing God could do this, but then you have to then prove that he's all-powerful and all-knowing. So all of these separate things have to kind of rely on each other. So, you know, him being omnipotent requires him to be omniscient as well. So to be all-powerful, you have to be all-knowing, and to be all-knowing, you have to be eternal. You have to be everlasting, and in order to be eternal and everlasting, you also have to be, you know, all-powerful and all-knowing. And to be all good, you have to be all-powerful and all-knowing, and you also have to exist outside of time, so you can see every timeline, every potential timeline, every single moment in time happening all at once, so you can see how things happen, and you're not limited by time and space. And so, you know, it's really tough to prove because they all rely on each other. And if you can't just simply logically prove it without any sort of empirical evidence, you're really going to struggle because there's no empirical evidence out there. And it's personally, for me, I feel like we don't know. Ultimately, we don't know. We can only form opinions and speculate, and we build up evidence, build it up, and then we finally say, this is my verdict based on all the evidence that I found. And so, personally for me, the evidence that I've accumulated has made me not believe in a god. And so, but that doesn't mean I never will. If there is evidence that comes forward, or someone publishes something that they're like, I've just had this thought process, and it made me think of this and this and this, and this proves God, and I look at it, I'm like, wow, that does make sense. I cannot think of a way to counter this, or nobody else has created a good counter to it, or their counters aren't convincing enough, then I will believe. However, as it stands right now, I don't. And that's just it. Thank you for watching.